The first stone was an argument with the earth. Elias strained, muscles cording in his back and arms, his boots slipping on the packed dirt floor of the cabin. It was a granite boulder, wide as his shoulders and thick as his chest, pulled from the creek bed a mile away. For 3 days he had worked it onto a wooden sledge and dragged it home, the runners groaning over the summer-baked ground. Now, in the center of the single room his parents had left him, he fought to lever it into the shallow pit he had dug. His only companion, a lean, brindle dog named Boro, watched from the doorway, head cocked, his intelligent eyes following every shift of his master's weight. The dog offered no help, only a silent, steady presence that was a comfort in itself. Finally, with a grunt that tore from his throat, Elias shoved the crowbar one last time. The stone tipped, settled, and landed in the pit with a deep, resonant thud that seemed to shake the very foundations of the small log building. Dust plumed up, catching in the shafts of late-afternoon sun slanting through the open door. Elias stood, chest heaving, sweat stinging his eyes. He placed a hand on the stone. It was cool, immense, and permanent. It was the beginning. Boro padded over, sniffed the perimeter of the great stone, and then looked up at Elias as if to ask what came next. Elias wiped his brow with the back of a dirty forearm. He didn't answer aloud. Instead, he went to a small wooden chest in the corner, the one thing his father had insisted they save from the fire that took the old farmhouse. From it, he pulled a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth, the pages filled with his grandfather's spidery, precise script and intricate, baffling diagrams. He opened it to a marked page. There, in faded brown ink, was a drawing of a stone, just like the one now sitting in his floor, labeled simply, "The Heart." Around it were drawings of channels, chambers, and flues, a complex labyrinth designed to capture and hold a force, not just create it. His grandfather had been an engineer in the old country, a man obsessed with thermodynamics and the slow, patient power of mass. The valley folk had thought him an eccentric. Elias was beginning to understand they may have thought him mad. He traced the lines of the diagram with a calloused finger. This was his inheritance. Not land or money, but knowledge. A theory of warmth. The next day, Silas came by. He was their closest neighbor, a man whose face was a roadmap of harsh winters and whose hands were gnarled from a lifetime of splitting oak. He leaned against the doorframe, chewing on a piece of straw. His eyes narrowed at the massive stone and the piles of clay and sand Elias was mixing with a hoe. "What in God's name are you building, boy?" Silas asked, his voice a dry rasp. "An altar to foolishness?" Elias didn't stop his work, just kept folding the heavy mixture of clay, sand, and straw. "A stove," he said, the words short, punctuated by the effort of his labor. Silas snorted, a sharp, dismissive sound. He stepped inside, walking around the growing foundation. "A stove? That thing's bigger than my woodpile. Where's the firebox? You'll need a firebox the size of a coffin to heat a mass like that. You'll burn through your winter wood by Christmas." He kicked at a loose pile of smaller river stones. "Listen to me. You get yourself a good cast-iron potbelly, radiates heat fast, keeps a room warm as long as you feed it. This is a monument to a cold death." Elias finally stopped, leaning on the hoe. He looked at the older man, his expression unreadable. "It'll work." "It'll work you into an early grave," Silas countered, shaking his head. "Your father was a sensible man. He'd tell you the same. Winter's not a thing for experiments." He lingered a moment longer, as if hoping for an argument he could win, but Elias had already turned back to his work, his silence a more stubborn defense than any word. Silas left, muttering to himself about the folly of youth and strange foreign ideas. Boro watched him go, then let out a low, quiet woof, as if offering his own opinion of the man. Weeks passed. The foundation grew. Elias worked from sunup to sundown, hauling stone, mixing his earthen mortar, and laying courses with a patience that bordered on religious. His hands, already tough, grew thicker, cracked and stained with clay. He was building not just a stove, but a piece of architecture within the cabin. It rose from the floor, a solid, curving mass of stone and earth that incorporated a low bench along one side and began to form a raised platform on the other. It was slow, repetitive, exhausting work. Each stone had to be selected, fitted, and mortared into place. Each layer of the clay-straw mixture had to be tamped down, dense and solid, leaving no air pockets. He was building a battery for heat, and its capacity depended on its mass. Inside this growing monolith, he constructed the secret. Following his grandfather's diagrams, he built a labyrinth of channels, a winding, serpentine flue that would snake back and forth through the core of the stove more than 5 times before it ever reached the chimney pipe. The smoke and hot gases from the fire, instead of rushing straight up and out, would be forced on a long, slow journey. They would crawl through the stone and clay, their energy bleeding into the mass, their heat captured and stored before the cooled gases were finally allowed to escape. The journal called it bell work, a system of inverted chambers that trapped the hottest air and forced it to surrender its power. It was counterintuitive. Every stove builder in the valley knew you wanted a good, strong draft to pull smoke out. Elias was building a system designed to intentionally slow it down, to hold it on the very edge of inefficiency. One afternoon, Mr. Hemlock rode by. He owned the lumber mill and most of the land that bordered Elias's small plot. He was a man accustomed to being listened to, his wealth a heavy cloak he wore with ease. He reined in his handsome bay horse, looking down his nose at the scene. The half-finished earthen structure, the shirtless, mud-streaked young man, the watchful dog. "That's the craziest thing I've ever seen," Hemlock declared, his voice carrying an easy authority. "My foreman told me you were building some kind of kiln in your house." Elias shielded his eyes from the sun. "It's a stove." Hemlock chuckled. "Son, I can sell you a brand new Monarch stove from my store, best cast iron you can buy. It'll heat this cabin up in 20 minutes. This monstrosity will likely burn your house down around you. Or worse, fill it with smoke and kill you in your sleep. What happens when that maze of yours gets clogged with creosote?" "I have a plan," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. The plan was in the journal, too. Clean-out ports, sealed with fitted stones, were built into the design at every turn of the flue. "A plan," Hemlock repeated, as if the word were a foreign delicacy he found distasteful. "Wait until the first real cold snap. Wait until the temperature drops to 20 below and the wind is howling. You'll wish you had a simple iron box you could throw a log into." He shook his head, a gesture of pity mixed with contempt. "Don't come to me for lumber when you have to rebuild." He spurred his horse and rode on, leaving a cloud of dust that settled over Elias's work. It wasn't all scorn. One sweltering August day, Lena brought a delivery from the general store, a sack of flour and a small parcel of salt. She was the storekeeper's daughter, a young woman with a quiet manner and eyes that missed little. Instead of leaving the goods on the porch, she brought them inside, her curiosity piqued by the structure that now filled a third of the cabin. She ran a hand over the smooth, hard-packed clay surface of the bench. It was still warm from the sun. "Silas says you're building your own tombstone," she said, but there was no mockery in her voice, only a genuine question. Elias, surprised, stopped his work. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. He saw not judgment, but interest. "It stores the heat," he said, finding himself wanting to explain. He picked up a small stone. "An iron stove gets hot fast, but it gets cold fast. It only heats the air. This," he patted the massive wall of the stove, "this will get warm slowly, and it will stay warm for a long time. It heats the objects in the room. The warmth radiates." She nodded, considering his words. "Like a stone that's been in the sun all day. It stays warm long after dark." "Exactly," Elias said, a rare smile touching his lips. "Just a very big stone." She smiled back. "My father says you're stubborn as a mule. My mother says you're grieving." She paused, her gaze soft. "I think you just might be smart." She left him with that, a small gift of faith that felt more substantial than any stone he had yet lifted. By late September, as the aspen leaves turned a brilliant, trembling gold, the stove was complete. It was an immense and beautiful thing, its surface plastered with a final fine layer of clay and mica, which gave it a subtle, earthy sparkle. It was not merely an appliance, it was the heart of the home. The main body rose nearly to the ceiling. A wide, warm bench invited one to sit. The raised platform on the other side, directly over the densest part of the thermal mass, was large enough for a mattress. There were niches for drying mittens and boots, and a cast-iron cooktop set flush into the surface above the firebox. It had consumed his summer, his strength, and every dollar he had. It was finished. Now came the test. The air grew a sharper edge each morning. The nights were cold enough to frost the windows. Elias spent the next week doing nothing but cutting and hauling wood. He didn't just gather a winter's supply. He gathered a massive temporary pyre. He stacked it near the cabin door until it stood taller than he was. The valley watched. Silas would walk by, shaking his head. Mrs. Gable, a kind woman who had been friends with his mother, brought him a thick stew and a worried look. "Elias, dear," she said, her hands twisting in her apron, "you can't possibly mean to burn all of that. It's wasteful. What will you do in January?" "This is for now," was all he would say. On the first day of October, with a clear, cold sky overhead, he began. He loaded the firebox, a chamber lined with heavy fire brick, surprisingly small for the size of the overall structure, with seasoned birch. He opened the flue damper all the way and lit the kindling. The fire caught with a roar, the draft pulling hard and clean. For 3 days and 3 nights, he did not let it stop. He fed the firebox continuously, keeping it at a constant high temperature. The stove drank the wood. The great pile outside shrank at an alarming rate. On the second day, the outer surface of the stove, which had been cool to the touch, began to feel warm. By the third day, the entire mass was radiating a powerful, steady heat. The clay bench was almost too hot to sit on for long. The air in the cabin was thick and dry. From the outside, the chimney belched a steady stream of white smoke. The skeptics felt vindicated. "See?" Silas told anyone who would listen at the general store. "I told you. The boys built a dragon that has to be fed constantly. He's burned a month's worth of wood in 3 days. He'll be frozen or begging by Thanksgiving." On the morning of the 4th day, Elias let the raging fire burn down to a deep bed of glowing coals. He waited until the last flame flickered out. Then, using a heavy iron hook, he pulled a thick, insulated plug into the mouth of the firebox, sealing it airtight. He went outside and closed the chimney damper, sealing the entire system from the outside world. There was no more fire. There was no more smoke. There was only the immense, silent mass, saturated with the energy of 3 days of continuous combustion. The cabin was a balmy 80 degrees. He opened a window to let the cool autumn air in. Boro, who had been panting in the heat, stretched out on the cool patch of floor near the door with a contented sigh. The great burn was over. The silence began. The first week passed. The weather held, crisp and cool. The temperature inside the cabin slowly dropped from its peak, stabilizing at a comfortable, steady 72 degrees. Elias cooked his meals on the retained heat of the cast-iron cooktop, which sizzled when he splashed a drop of water on it. He slept on the warm platform, a single blanket his only covering. He used no wood. The second week passed. The first real cold front of the season blew in from the north. The temperature outside plummeted into the 20s at night. In other cabins, fires were lit every evening and stoked through the night. The comforting smell of wood smoke hung heavy in the valley air. But no smoke rose from Elias's chimney. The temperature inside his cabin remained unchanged. The bench was still a pleasure to sit on, the platform a warm bed. By the third week, the whispers in the valley grew louder. People were burning through their wood tiles faster than they had in years. The cold was persistent, biting. Silas, his own potbelly stove demanding tribute every few hours, grew quiet. He would stare at Elias's cabin from his porch, at the smokeless chimney, a deep line of confusion etched between his brows. He couldn't understand it. It defied the logic of a lifetime spent fighting the cold. Then, the ice winter came. It did not arrive with a blizzard's fury, but with a quiet, lethal stillness. The sky turned a flat, metallic gray. The temperature dropped and did not rise again. 10 below, 15, then 20 below zero, where it stayed for days on end, the air so cold it felt sharp in the lungs. The wind was a razor, slicing through the chinking of the log cabins, finding every crack and seam. The river froze solid, the ice groaning and cracking in the unnatural cold. Trees exploded in the forest, their sap freezing and expanding with a sound like a rifle shot. It was a cold that broke things. It broke tools, it broke axles, and it was beginning to break spirits. In town, the Monarch and Potbelly stoves, once praised for their quick heat, became tyrants. They devoured wood. The intense heat they threw off would bake one side of a person, while the other side, facing away, remained chilled. As soon as the fire died down, the cold would rush back into the room, a palpable, creeping presence. Families huddled together in a single room, wrapped in every blanket they owned, their worlds shrinking to the small circle of warmth around their hungry iron gods. Woodpiles vanished. Mr. Hemlock's vast stores of milled lumber became a precious commodity, the price rising with every degree the thermometer dropped. Inside Elias's cabin there was peace. The great mass of the stove, its thermal battery now discharging its stored energy, radiated a gentle, pervasive warmth. It was not a blast of heat, but a constant, silent presence. The floor was warm, the walls were warm, the very air was warm. The temperature held at a steady 68 degrees. Elias wore a simple wool shirt. Boro dozed on the heated bench, twitching in a dream of chasing summer rabbits. Elias hadn't burned a single stick of wood in over a month. He would occasionally unseal the firebox to check. Inside, the ashes were stone cold. He would place a hand on the stove's flank. It felt like a living thing, breathing out a slow, endless summer. The first knock on the door came late one night, when the wind was howling a desperate song around the eaves. It was Silas. His face was gray with cold and worry, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He didn't look at Elias, but past him, into the impossible warmth. "My wife," he rasped, his voice cracking. "She's taken a chill. Our wood, it's almost gone. I've been burning the fence posts." He finally met Elias's eyes, and in them was the complete, shattering surrender of a man who has discovered his entire life was based on a flawed premise. "How?" he whispered, stepping across the threshold and flinching as the wave of warmth enveloped him. It was so complete, so different from the harsh, directional heat of his own stove. "There's no fire." Elias didn't offer an explanation. He just stepped back. "Come in," he said. "Bring your wife." Silas returned half an hour later, his wife, Martha, wrapped in a quilt, her breathing shallow. Elias helped them inside, settling Martha on the warm bench. She sighed, a sound of pure, bone-deep relief, and fell into a deep sleep. Silas sat on a stool, staring at the silent, miraculous stove, his face a mask of awe and disbelief. He didn't speak for an hour. Word travels fast in a small, cold valley. The next day, Mrs. Gable arrived, her 2 young children in tow, their faces pinched and blue. She was crying, not from sadness, but from relief, as she unwrapped their feet and placed them on the warm clay. "We were so cold," she sobbed. "So cold." They kept coming. The family from down the road, their well pump frozen solid. The old trapper from the high ridges, his fingers showing the first signs of frostbite. Soon, Elias's small cabin was a refuge. 17 people found shelter within its walls. They slept in shifts on the floor, on the bench, on the warm platform next to Elias. The cabin was crowded and filled with the sound of sleeping breaths, but it was safe. It was an ark of warmth in a world of ice. They would cook communal meals on the still hot cooktop, marveling that it could boil water with no fire beneath it. They would touch the stove's surface again and again, as if to reassure themselves it was real. Mr. Hemlock was the last to arrive. He didn't come for shelter. His pride wouldn't allow it. His own grand house, with its 4 massive fireplaces, was an icebox. His servants couldn't feed the hearths fast enough. He came on foot, his expensive coat inadequate against the brutal cold. He stood in the doorway, his face pale, and simply looked. He saw Silas's wife sleeping peacefully. He saw Mrs. Gable's children playing a quiet game on a warm patch of floor. He saw the faces of his neighbors, filled not with fear, but with a quiet gratitude. And he looked at the massive, silent stove, the source of it all. He finally turned his gaze to Elias. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, grudging respect. "You were right," he said, the words seeming to cost him a great deal. "I was wrong." He turned and walked away, back into the cold. The ice winter broke as slowly and quietly as it had arrived. The gray sky softened, the wind lost its edge, and one miraculous morning, the temperature climbed to 0. A week later, a Chinook wind blew down from the mountains, and the great thaw began. The world dripped. Icicles crashed from the eaves. The river began to move again. The survivors of the valley's harshest winter in living memory emerged from Elias's cabin, blinking in the pale sun, their lives irrevocably changed. They returned to their cold, silent homes, but the memory of the warmth remained. The experience had remade them. The following weeks were a time of quiet reckoning. Silas was the first to come to Elias, hat in his hands, his face open and honest. "I was a fool, boy. A stubborn old fool. I thought I knew the cold." He looked at the stove, which was still giving off a faint, pleasant warmth more than 2 months after its last fire. "That thing, it's not just a stove. It's a promise." He cleared his throat. "I want you to teach me. I want to build one before next winter." Elias simply nodded. I'll show you." A few days later, Mr. Hemlock arrived, not with an apology, but with a proposition. "The knowledge in that stove," he began, gesturing with a gloved hand. "It's too important to belong to one man. I was wrong about you, and about your creation. I want to make it right." He offered to supply the fire brick, the cast iron doors, and the chimney pipes for any family in the valley who wanted to build one. He would provide the materials at his own cost. His only condition was that Elias oversee the work, that he share the wisdom from his grandfather's journal. And so, the quiet, solitary young man became a teacher. He didn't speak much more than he ever had, but he demonstrated. He brought out the worn leather journal and spread it on his table. He patiently traced the diagrams for Silas, for Hemlock's foreman, for the other men who came, their earlier mockery replaced by a deep and urgent curiosity. He showed them how to mix the clay, sand, and straw to the right consistency. He taught them the importance of mass, the logic of the winding flues, the simple genius of capturing every last calorie of heat before letting the smoke escape. Lena was often there, helping to organize the work crews, bringing hot food and coffee, her presence a quiet, constant support for Elias. She would watch him, his hands confidently guiding another's, his few words carrying the weight of proven truth, and her admiration for him deepened into something more. That summer, the valley was filled with the sounds of construction, not of new homes, but of new hearts for old ones. 7 new stoves rose from the floors of the valley's cabins, each one a testament to the winter they had survived. They were called Elias stoves, a name that stuck, though Elias himself never used it. To him, it was always just his grandfather's stove. He had simply been the first one to listen. Time passed. The seasons turned, each bringing its own challenges, but the ice winter was never repeated. The valley was prepared. The massive, slow-breathing stoves became the center of every home, their gentle, radiant heat a constant comfort against the mountain cold. Elias and Lena married in the quiet way they did everything, their union a surprise to no one. They raised 2 children in the small cabin, a son and a daughter, who grew up sleeping on the warm platform of the great stove, thinking it the most natural thing in the world. Boro grew old. His brindle coat became flecked with gray, his movements stiff. He spent most of his days dozing on the heated bench, his favorite spot in all the world. One autumn evening, years later, surrounded by the family he had watched grow, he lifted his head, licked Elias's hand one last time, and then laid his head down and breathed no more. His passing was peaceful, a quiet end in the warmth and safety he had always known. Elias buried him beneath the large oak tree on the hill overlooking the cabin, marking the spot with a simple, smooth river stone. He stood there for a long time, one hand resting on the stone, his silent farewell to his first and most faithful believer. Elias himself grew old. His hair turned the color of winter frost, and his hands, though still strong, bore the deep lines of a life of labor and patience. He became the valley's quiet elder, the man they sought not for governance, but for wisdom. He didn't speak in council meetings, but men would come to his cabin, sit on the warm bench, and ask his advice. He would listen more than he spoke, his answers as short and solid as the stones in his stove. He taught his son how to build, passing the grandfather's journal, now even more worn and fragile, into a new generation's care. One cold winter morning, when Elias was 83 years old, he did not wake up. Lena found him on the sleeping platform, a peaceful expression on his face, as if he had simply drifted off in a pleasant dream. He had passed away in his sleep, in the steady, gentle warmth of the stove he had built as a stubborn, determined boy. They buried him on the hill next to Boro, under the oak tree. The whole valley came to pay their respects. They placed a granite marker, carved by his own son, next to the simple river stone. It read, "Elias Kane. He taught us how to be warm." Years later, long after Lena had passed and the cabin was occupied by his grandchildren, the stove remained. It stood silent and massive in the center of the home, its clay skin worn smooth by the hands of generations. It was fired only once each autumn, a great 3-day burn that became a family ritual, a tradition of remembrance. And then, for the rest of the long, cold winter, it would breathe out its gentle, stored heat, a silent, enduring monument not of stone and clay, but of the quiet power of a single, unconventional idea. It was a testament to the stubborn boy who listened to the past, ignored the noisy present, and in doing so, secured the future for them all. The cabin was always warm.